The East End of London has been associated with garments, with making clothes and with fabrics for hundreds of years. The Huguenots, who were refugees from France, they made and used silk. They made gloves. There was leather. The Jewish tailors would make many, many beautiful, beautiful made clothes. And then the sweatshops of the Jewish companies with their sewing machines would make clothes for the whole of the world, and well, certainly for London and England. And any day, if you walk along the streets of the East End, you will see beautiful, beautiful materials for saris and lovely outfits. And this story is about a tailor, a man who made clothes. But it's also about nature, because the East End of London and nature were very, very close. Because it happened that London, at the end of the city, there were a few settlements, and then suddenly there was a forest which stretched into Essex. And it happened that this tailor was walking through this forest one day. And as he was walking along, he heard a sound. He heard a song. La 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 la. He didn't know what it was, so he continued walking. And he walked, and he heard again, la 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 la. And he looked over, and he realized that it was coming from one of the trees. Well, I have to tell you something about tailors in those days, because a tailor would travel from place to place to make clothes. But around the waist of the tailor, there was a string, and hanging on the string, there was a little bag with needles and thread. There were the tailor's scissors, and there was usually an iron, an old iron that you would heat up, called a flat iron. And the tailor would walk through, do his work, and would always have his tools by him. And when he heard this music coming from this tree, this song was coming out of a tree, he looked at the tree and he thought, how can this be? But before long, he reached into the little bag which had the needles and thread, and he took one of his big needles, and he stuck it into the tree. Well, as soon as he stuck it in the tree, the needle turned into a key. The key turned, a door opened, and he fell right into the bottom of the inside of the tree. It was a huge chamber in the tree, and as he looked around, he saw hundreds and thousands of needles coming in his direction, and they pricked him and stuck him and stabbed him. It was so terrible. He was covered in needles. He was being stabbed all over. And he reached for his scissors, and he hacked and he pushed and he knocked and he hacked, and he made a hole into what he thought was the outside of the tree, and another door opened and he fell, but he was in another chamber of the tree. Oh, what? And then he heard snip, snip, knip, knip, snip, clap, clip, snip, snip, snip. And hundreds of scissors were coming at him, and they were snipping at his clothes and his skin, and he was being torn to shreds. What could he do but reach for his iron? And with his big iron, he banged and he hit, and he banged with all his might until he banged a hole. And this time it was the outside of the tree. He went through the hole and he landed. Oh, oh, oh no! He was outside the tree, but he was on the top of a thorn bush, and they were pricking into him. And then it started to rain. But this wasn't any ordinary rain. It started to rain irons, and the irons came down, and the irons hit, and the irons bruised, and the irons hurt, and he was covered in irons, banging, hitting everywhere he looked. And he looked over, and he saw an old, empty, hollow tree, and he ran into that tree. Oh, He was away from the needles and the scissors and the irons that were hitting him all over. Ah! But then he looked down and he saw hundreds and hundreds of red ants, and they were biting him and crawling up his legs. And he said, "No, no, if only this would stop. I promise I will never, ever hurt a tree in all my life." And suddenly it stopped raining irons, and the red ants disappeared. And from that moment, that tailor never, ever again damaged a tree. Now, that story about an East End tailor was actually borrowed from a story that was only recently found about 15 years ago in Germany. And it's from the collection of Franz Sava von Schönwert. Thank you.
Thank you, Sef Townsend, for that fantastic story. We're East, a storytelling project for East London, and we're currently crowdfunding to move our work online. We do have an online archive of stories and songs from our project. It's the East Archive, but most of our work's been about getting people together in a room, normally round a table, sharing food, stories and songs from our different cultures. And that kind of work is obviously not possible anymore. So we've come up with a program for working online, sharing stories, but also providing some coaching and confidence building for people who haven't told stories before, so that they can tell their stories too. We don't really have any overheads. It's not an extravagant project in any way, so all the money that you give will go straight on the project, and even small donations will make a huge difference to the kind of work we're doing. So if you can donate, please do. There's a link in the text accompanying this video, and we will be very, very grateful indeed. Thank you very much.